Welcome to In the Funnel. My name is Mark Cox. In the Funnel is a group of sales coaches and consultants that help B2B sales teams dramatically improve revenue. Clients come to us when revenue growth is stagnated, or their sales team is not meeting expectations, or they need to recalibrate their sales and go-to-market plan for the upcoming year. Our clients have enjoyed tremendous success working within the funnel, and please hear it straight from them by listening to the testimonial section of this website. What they'll tell you is there's two things that make us unique and different in our space. Number one, we have a process and a methodology. First, for understanding your current state, and then second, for building your sales and go-to-market plan for the upcoming year. The second thing that makes us unique and different is that everybody within the funnel has run a material sales organization in their recent past. We're all practitioners. We don't have any theorists or teachers, and what that means is we can get in front of your sales team and run the next sales meeting, or join them on their next sales call to close your next large prospect. All of us have a passion for professional, disciplined, process-driven sales, and we'd be delighted to talk to you if you're looking to grow revenue for your company. Please feel free to reach out to us through this website at info@inthefunnel.com or by telephone. Thanks for taking the time to watch this.
Social proof connects the persuasiveness of an idea with how others are responding to it. I mean, this principle is so popular. You mentioned Robert Cialdini's book, Influence. He talks about this. I mean, there's so much research on social proof, but salespeople often don't know how to apply it. So all you're doing is, in the situation with a question, you're making it normal. You're using social proof in your favor by sharing. A lot of people are concerned. Let's say that I think I have a reason why I think that they decided not to move forward with me. And so but I know if I just ask them, can I ask why, just for my feedback, why you chose not to move forward with us? They're going to give me some politically correct nonsense answer. I know, okay. So I got to make it normal. But let's say I have an inclination. It might be because, they didn't feel like now was the right time. So let's say I want to go fishing for that. And so I might use social proof to normalize that so it's safe to give me the response. So oftentimes I found, Mark and David, when organizations don't move forward, that are in a similar situation, often they feel that now isn't the right time. I mean, do you guys find that that's the case here as well? Now I've made it safe, and they're going to go, now they don't have to feel like they're going to offend me, right? Or there's going to be any kind of confrontation because I just changed everything. And all I did was leverage social proof.
Hey, David, I'm refreshed, relaxed, just back in from Italy, still battling jet lag. Tell me why you're excited for today's podcast with David Hoffeld.
Well, I'm really excited for David Hoffeld. As a matter of fact, when I started as a sales manager, one of the first books I picked up was Selling with Science. And, what really spoke to me is, can we actually have a scientific methodology to something that really is pretty crazy and dynamic, the whole sales process. But having a guy like David here, the CEO of his sales training organization, probably one of the most passionate people that I can think of, and just sucking in all this sales, all these studies and case studies and everything, and then sort of spitting it back out in a way that guys like myself and you can understand, and the general public is a real gift that he's given to the sales organization. So he's got two books, Selling with Science and Selling More with Science, that just came out last year.
Well, this is the one thing I've always said that sales is both an art and a science. It's a performance art with some science behind it. And I think all of us want those facts and the data that help us sell better. And David's he's got a great journey in professional sales. Very interesting story. He's done a lot of research. I think he references over 1,000 academic journals and reference materials for his latest book. And so applying some of those things, understanding, social psychology, understanding neuroscience, understanding behavioral economics, defining all those terms and understanding how they apply to our selling behaviors is really helpful. And so you're right. He's one of those people like yourself where the energy and enthusiasm for professional sales is contagious. He makes you want to learn. The learning sounds fun. So really looking forward to an amazing conversation with David today.
Yeah, me too. Marco, you play a lot of hockey, right?
I do. I love hockey.
Do you ever hear that saying, holding the stick too tight?
Yeah, I do.
What does that typically mean?
That means you're trying too hard, right? So maybe you've missed a few open nets and you haven't scored for a while. So then you start to squeeze the stick too tight and you're trying too hard. And when you're trying too hard, you don't get the result.
And I think that one of the great things about, that I think that just to talk to some of the listeners here about David in particular is I think that he sort of prevents that because he gives you some methodologies and some things that you can do very practically, very simple things that can just make you loosen your grip a little bit, become a little bit more relaxed, become a curious learner, really be there for the client and really help them with the right solution at the end. And I think that's what I'm most excited about today, Mark, to really hear what he has to say about that.
Beautifully said. Gives you a little bit of confidence. And then you can calm down and authentically be in the moment in a discussion with the buyer to make sure it's about them and helping them get to a better future by really understanding where they're at. Let's jump into this conversation. I'm sure it's going to be a great one today.
Wait.
Hey, David, welcome to the show. It's such a pleasure to have you on the Selling Well podcast.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be with both of you today.
So you've written a couple of great books on the science of selling. And, David Fauser and I were so excited to talk to you today because I think all of us wish there was sort of this definitive scientific model for selling. So we could just execute on the science, do the same thing every time and get a definitive answer. It's one of the reasons I loved math so much in high school. There was an answer. There was no answer to English. There was no answer to, perfect answer all the time to things like the arts. But before we jump into your excellent books here, David, tell us a little bit about your journey in professional sales and kind of what led you here today.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm always passionate about talking about science because it does give that clarity. And that's what I was looking for when I first got into the profession of selling. I kind of stumbled into it like a lot of people in that I thought it would be just for a short time. So I went to, back then, the newspaper, and I was looking for a job. Yeah, that tells you how old I am. I'm old.
Me too.
Because I I went to the newspaper, the help wanted, and I thought, I had done some presentations and I was graduating with a master's degree. And so I thought, I could probably sell something. Naively, that was my thought. So I looked and I found the job that captured my attention, interviewed, got the job. And I really fell in love with the profession of selling because I saw when it's done well, it is this beautiful thing where you're really helping someone make a good decision that is in their best interest. And as I got into selling, I began to just devour sales training. I wanted to learn and really improve in this thing called selling. And what I was looking for was like evidence, because I had come from, reading academic journals for my master's thesis and studying. And I'm like, okay, where's the evidence? And I was having a hard time finding any evidence. So out of desperation, I just started looking at the journals that I had studied for my master's in cognitive psychology and some neuroscience and communication theory, social psychology, even a little behavioral economics back then, which was just starting out. And I said, well, how can I become a better presenter? How do I influence people? How does our brains even form choices? And there's a wealth of research. And the more I started looking, the more passionate I became. In fact, I'll confess this to both of you. I developed probably the oddest hobby of anyone in sales I've ever heard of. And that is evenings, weekends, I became obsessed with reading academic journals and applying it to selling. I would spend hours and hours, but I started getting results from this. I mean, my sales just skyrocketed. And then, of course, as you do often when that happens, companies promote you and they say, can you do this with others? And so I don't know. And so I started teaching them some of the principles. And I mean, just the company sales just skyrocketed. And so I just became, for years, we're talking about, this is about a 10-year journey to really apply this science. And I started creating models. And then back in 2009, I launched my own firm. And my first book came out in 2016. The other came out earlier this year. And we talk about how do we apply this science that's been around for decades, often that's been confirmed in hundreds, sometimes thousands of studies, to the act of selling, to make selling more predictable and allow us to be predictably effective. And that's what I believe science does. And I've seen the results of companies I've trained literally all over the world, thousands and thousands, tens of thousands now of salespeople. And it's been amazing to see the clarity that science brings to the process of selling.
Well, you've tagged on so many things there we'll unpack, but as soon as you get into increasing the predictability of selling, almost anybody listening to this podcast, whether they're a CEO or a sales leader or a sales professional, their ears are going to, perk up and they can't wait to hear. So maybe just as a starting point, and probably for me more than anybody on this podcast, the book touches on a number of different topics, social psychology, neuroscience, behavioral economics. Do you mind if we kind of define a couple of those terms, and simply for me, for the folks listening also?
Absolutely. It's a great question. So neuroscience, we'll start there, deals with really our study of the brain. And we're looking specifically on how value is created in the brain. So why is it that we perceive, one salesperson presents about a product or service to us and we perceive a high levels of value, and another salesperson presents the exact same product or service and we perceive very low value. So it's a matter of perception. We also look at attention and really the social dynamics of how our brain responds to things, everything from certain questions that have been studied. And there's been some of the breakthroughs in technology. We literally know how our brains respond to certain things and how they don't. Now, when it comes to behavioral economics, this is a blossoming field really that has been transformed over the last 20 years. As I mentioned, when I first got into sales, it was kind of just beginning in its infancy, but now it's transforming the world. What that does is it takes standard economic theory and it injects behavioral science into it, because people often don't follow pure logic. In fact, rarely do we. We'll often make illogical decisions on a regular basis. But what's really interesting is one behavioral economist, Dan Ariely, coined the term, we are predictably irrational. We often do irrational things, but we do it very predictably. And so why is that? Because you and I there's certain things that science has revealed that govern our decision making, and it's not logic. And so understanding what those are is a lot of what behavioral economic, how do we look at economic decisions through the lens of behavioral science to give us a more accurate and, again, predictable understanding of, if this happens, we're more likely to do this than that. And then social psychology is just looking how human beings are influenced in a social setting. So, of course, as I define each of these very, very briefly, it doesn't take anyone who's been in sales for more than a few minutes to see, wow, this really sounds relevant to what we do as sellers. Because as sellers, one of the things that attracted me to selling when I first saw it done well is we influence people. And what is influence? I define it as guiding people and taking what you say seriously and then be willing to act on it, right? So all of us want to be effective at influence, whether we're influencing other people, our children, society as a whole. We want to improve, and improvement comes via the mechanism of influence. And so that's what the science reveals, is it pulls back the curtain and says, how does influence occur? What does science say about this? And again, it is unbelievably empowering, because regardless of whether you have a lot of natural ability or not when it comes to selling, armed with the science, we can literally improve anyone's sales performance.
Wow. So by the way, I love Dan Ariely's, I always get the pronunciation of his name wrong, but some of the exercises that he has in the book, the predictably irrational or just spectacular, also a great read for those out there. And of course, some of the concepts you've referenced here, we've heard of earlier days in the very early 80s with Cialdini's first book, Influence, which was so very, very helpful. But let's take it down. One of the things that's just so important, I think, today is I may have read in the book that you'd talked about thousands of research papers where you'd been researching all of these things, and then you boil these things down into manageable chunks. You really you become the Google for us of taking these things down to our level. Let's talk about At a basic level, for the folks out there today selling, a couple of these science-based sales strategies that can be helpful that we can take and apply. What are some of the things we should be thinking about as sales professionals that we may not know the science behind? What would be a couple of the top ones you'd reference? And I know you've got some great tools on the website and some great um, uh, great white papers that we can download. But let's talk about some of the ones that always come front of mind when you're in front of a group of people, David.
Sure, there's a number. There's so much science that covers a lot of areas. I'll share with you, I think one of the most impactful, looking at the thousands and thousands of salespeople and organizations that we've worked with. One is how the buying decision occurs. And I'll lay this out and then I'll break it down for you step by step, real quickly. So when we look at what is the goal of a salesperson, I think a simplistic definition is we want to help people form a good buying decision.
Yeah.
Now the fun starts because we say, well, how does a buying decision occur? And this is where the room usually gets really, really silent. And they go, well, and now here's the problem with that. If we take a step back, how do we help people do something when we don't really know what that something is, right? That seems pretty simple question. And that's, again, where a lot of sales, where a lot of the challenge really begins is if our goal is to help people through the buying process and we don't really know how the buying process occurs, how do we do that? So let's talk about what does science say regarding the buying process. There's a lot we could talk about here. One model that I'll share that's really helpful and a great starting place for anyone who wants to dip their toe into this and see the impact it can make is looking at the buying process as a series of incremental commitments. And that idea of commitments matter in selling is not a new idea, right? That's been around. Neil Rackham in 1988 in Spin Selling popularized this idea, and it was around even before that. We're not talking about continuations, though, or we're talking about just basic buy-in either. We're talking about what are the building blocks of the sale? How does a buying decision is created? And what the science shows, going back to the 1950s and 60s, and then researchers building on one another's work since that period of time, is there are certain commitments that matter more than others. And we look at, so when I look at my sales process or any sales process, how do I know if it's effective or not just at glancing at one? Is it guiding people through these essential commitments that their brains must make? So what are those? We'll cut right through the science and get real practical. We call them the 6 whys. And these are 6 specific questions that each begin with the word why, so they're easy to remember, that represent the mental steps my brain, your brain, our brains must go through when forming any buying decision. I'm going to lay these out real quickly in rapid fire. But as I do, when you want you to look at your sales process and say, am I guiding those I sell to through these commitments? If I'm not, that's always going to be a problem because people have to make these commitments one way or another. So anytime we've bought anything, we've made all 6 of these commitments. And as I share them with you, it'll be very clear, like, yeah, all of these clearly matter. But imagine now if we can be proactive in guiding when we're selling, knowing, okay, what's the road to the buying decision? These 6 commitments. So what am I trying to accomplish in the sale? These 6 commitments. Or let's say I'm in a really complex sale, long sales cycle, and we've been working with a client for a number of months, and I'm going into my 5th sales call with them. What should I talk about? Well, most salespeople go, I don't know, I'm running out of PowerPoints, right? I'm not, no, I'll just check in and see what's going on. But if you know, okay, here's the roadmap to the sale, I can confirm the commitments I've already got. And whenever ones are outstanding still, that's what I focus on. So what this does is it aligns selling with buying, and it's really impactful. So let me run through these 6 rapid fire.
Please.
I'm going to share them in a numerical order, but selling is messy, as you've already alluded to. So sometimes people walk in with 1 or more of these already committed to. They can happen in any order. There's overlap, but you want to be attentive to all of them and see where your client is in relationship to them. And there's a lot of practical takeaways from this, but let's go through them. Number 1, why change? This is often the foundation. Until you create the curiosity, at least for change, most of your potential clients won't want to talk to you, or they'll go dark, or they won't respond to you because they don't have that curiosity needed for change. So until we get a commitment to change, the sale doesn't happen. But that's not all. Second, we'll talk about why now. Why should I do this now versus wait, especially in our current economic climate where procrastination is the norm? Why shouldn't I wait till next year? Why shouldn't I wait to see how the economy does over the next 6 to 9 months. Why should I do this now? Addressing that and getting a commitment to that is also mission critical. Third, why your industry solution? Oftentimes in most industries, our potential clients can go around us and our direct competitors by just creating a solution on their own. And I call this a silent sales assassin, because salespeople often don't see it coming because they're so focused on themselves and thinking about their direct competitors, companies like us, that they forget, can the client do a version of this on their own? Maybe it's not as good, but oftentimes your potential clients may say, well, it's a first step. Let's try this out. We'll see how it goes. If it doesn't work, we'll call you. Right? So how do we address why they should even consider using our industry solution? Fourth, why you and your company? Obviously, that's one that's on the radar for most sales professionals. And then fifth, why your product or service? Again, why is that the right solution for your potential client, and guiding them in thinking through and committing to that? And then the last, but certainly not least, is why spend the money? Oftentimes, there is a limited amount of funds. So you could have a potential client who says, Mark, David, love what you're offering. We need it. We want it. You're the provider for us. However, I also need new machines for my factory. We only have enough money in the budget to do one, either buy from you or get those machines. So I'm kind of leaning more maybe towards those machines, which we also desperately need. So now I'm going against a very non-traditional competitor, because the competitor is anything or anyone that can take that business away. And so why should they invest with you versus in a competing option that might be totally unrelated? So when you step back and look at those 6 whys and almost think of them as a wheel that you want to make sure that your clients have committed to, think if one of those isn't committed, here's what happens. The sale always breaks down. And usually it's verbalized in an objection and the sale never happens. I mean, if they won't commit to one of those, they're not going to buy. However, if they do commit to all of those, the sale is usually inevitable. So it gives us a roadmap. Now, there's a lot to say on how we execute all that, but now at a high level, you can go in and look at your sales process and say, do I directly address them? And what you'll find is most people find there are 1 or 2 of those whys. When you do a win-loss analysis, when you lose sales and you say, okay, which of those whys am I not getting a commitment to? 1 or 2 of them are most likely costing you over 50 to 60% of your lost sales. And now you say, okay, how do I address that why more directly? How do I present more evidence, create a better business case to get a commitment to that why? And when you do, sales always goes up. And so that's one of the applications that we often teach is that win-loss analysis. Doing a win-loss analysis, salespeople say, oh no, please don't make me do a win-loss analysis because I do it and nothing happens and I don't want to. With the 6 whys, it brings transparency and clarity, because you say, okay, which of those did I not get a commitment to? A lack of commitment is your biggest problem in the sale. And so now you know why you're losing sales. You can collaborate with others on your team and just start thinking differently of, how do I address this why? And that always does one thing, it increases sales, because you're identifying that bottleneck of why you're not selling more and addressing that. So the 6 whys, there's so much science behind that. We can literally talk about it all day, and I have at times, but I'll refrain myself and just share those 6 whys, use them. It is an absolute game changer and allows you to really practically apply science immediately to get results today.
So those,
sorry, Mark, I want to ask this before I forget about it. When the win-loss analysis really piqued my interest, because I've been looking at that for quite a while and how we'd implement it. And as you were talking, it was becoming clear to me that you could literally just ask those 6 questions to find out why you've lost a sale. I mean, it's not really that much rocket science, so to speak, right? It seems pretty straightforward.
That's a great point. You're absolutely right. That's the problem with win-loss analysis is, right, often they take a long time. People got to fill out forms and they go, why am I doing this? Besides, they told me I had to do it. And then within a few months, no one does it. So management says, you know what, let's just let it go. We wouldn't get anything out of it anyway. And so with this, the 6 whys, it can take a moment or two. I mean, and a lot of organizations we work with will even put this in their CRM and start collecting the data. Because, it's great to do when you do it for the first or second time. But after you get a few months of this, you're going to be like, oh, wow. As I look back at this, I didn't realize that so much of my sales or our sales as a team or an organization were being lost here. Now you can collaborate. And I've seen organizations when they start saying, how do we address why change more effectively in our marketing collateral? How do we do it on our initial sales? All the insights that come because you're directing the focus rather than, okay, how do we grow sales, guys? Anyone have any ideas? No. Whereas if you say, how do we create a stronger business case for change on that initial call? Or let's say we're all three on the same sales team, right? And I'm struggling with creating urgency with why now. But Mark isn't. Mark's killing it there. And Mark's sales are never lost there, but mine are. I could say, Mark, how are you addressing why now? Right? So now there's this productive collaboration where you can share some best practices on what you're doing to address that why, and I can scale up really quickly. So it takes those win-loss analysis from something you have to do to something you want to do. And equally important, it's easy to do. There's very little friction. Give me a minute of your time asking those questions. And once you become attentive to them, it becomes very clear where you're losing sales and what you can do about it.
The way you laid those out so clearly, David, a couple of things come to mind. First of all, anybody in marketing listening to this, you could literally have part of your marketing, your website, answer these 6 questions for you and your business and your solution. So at a high level, so that might enable somebody doing research on their own to do their own reframing to a certain extent. So you answer the bullets at a high level and generic position. Second pro tip I'd throw out, team, just on a win-loss review. The main reason I think these don't occur is because I think at times they become a witch hunt. And so I think it's important to make sure that we're in a psychologically safe place with salespeople, that when we do a win-loss review, we already know who the witch is. We lost. We're all around the cauldron. So the idea of the win-loss review is not to point blame or to have judgment. It's to grab a nugget or two of learning that we can apply to the next time. And again, I love the way these questions are laid out. The third kind of pro tip I'd throw out is for those of us listening that were selling into large enterprise, big bank, for example, what I find is their reason for not moving forward in the moment, the heat of the moment, tends to be a politically correct answer. So they may not give you the legitimate response if you've invested 6, 9, 12 months in a sales cycle as to why they chose a competitor or why they chose to do nothing. They come up with a politically correct response that doesn't cause any kerfuffle. However, if you ask them the same questions 3, 4, 5 months later, they don't remember the politically correct answer. They just remember the truth. So if you go back and you're checking in, just want to make sure everything's going well, whichever decision they decided on and where they're going, and say, remind me again of where we came up a little bit short. It's quite interesting, the response you'll get from a buyer then, where you can really apply those nuggets, because now you're getting the unvarnished truth. They can't remember what they may have thrown out politically before. The two of the ones that jump out to me right now, David, just being so important, and David Fauser, you can let me know if this is what you experience with your large team. The why now. And so a lot of folks would freely admit that there's so many ways of improving their business. But what we're hearing everywhere, David, is that, buyers are getting so scared of making a decision, they'd rather miss out versus mess up. And that comes from Matt Dixon's new book, Jolt. You remember the Challenger sale, but he's written a whole book on the fact that no decision is killing all of us right now because we're not giving a compelling reason. I think it's the why now is really tough. And I also think number 6, why spend the money? We think it's self-evident for our buyers, but what we don't understand is our buyers don't even know how to build the business case to get a major decision made in their environment because they don't do it every day and they're not doing it every year. So I think that tends to be this helping them work that number 6, the why spend the money? How do we get that return on investment to go forward with this? Seems to me to be a real nugget. What do you think, David Fauser? You've got 140 some odd salespeople reporting to you. Is this something you see?
Yeah, for sure. And I remember first reading your book back in 2017, I think it was, when I read Science of Selling and hearing about your 6 whys. And I just, it spoke to me immediately, Dave. And to me, what I like about it is not everybody's curious. And these questions themselves are just curiosity, like you said earlier. And you don't need to, if you're not naturally curious, I think that you could just ask these in a sales call just the way they are. And they're sort of direct in a sense, and you would get a pretty good answer, I think, from some of them, right? Like, the one that sticks out to me is why your product or service. And I know that often we know what we think it is, but it's usually never matches up to what the customer thinks it is, right? So that's what I find to be curious or interesting about the 6 questions.
Yeah, those are great insights. I think it's powerful, and the way you frame questions, I think, to what you're both speaking to matters a lot as well. The framing, and we can talk about that. I mean, briefly, because let's say you've presented about your product or service. We'll go with that one, and you want to find out what they think. You ask, you have any questions? That's a stereotypical salesperson question, right? Any questions? Buyer says, no questions.
Right.
Does this all make sense to you? Oh, makes a lot of sense. And they're like, oh, good. Well, that doesn't mean anything, right? I mean, a lot of things make sense, and I understand that I'm not doing them, right? I mean, I get it. Doesn't mean I'm doing nothing. So what would that sound like on an actual sales call? Well, we want to think about it from a scientific point of view. I'm going to leverage a lot of science here. I'm just going to give you the practical application, though. I want to prepare people for commitment. So let's say we did that. I presented about my product or service to both of you, and we've gone through and I've applied it to you. I understand your situation. I've applied it specifically to how it would help. And you see that. I probably have asked some questions along the way, but how would I get a commitment? I might ask a question to prepare you for the commitment, to prime your brain, which is a powerful principle in behavioral science priming. I would say, so if you were to have this solution we've discussed, I'd love to get both of your thoughts on what would be some of the biggest benefits that you think you would experience. And now you're going to go, well, and you're going to think through that value I just shared, and you're going to articulate it publicly. And that's going to strengthen that belief. There's a lot of cool studies on this. How do you get someone to believe something even more? You ask them to defend it publicly, and you can frame it just like that. And then let's say you say, well, I think it would help us here, 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 and here. Okay. So this solution that we've laid out, do you feel this would be the right solution then for your organization based on what we've discussed so far? And they're going to say yes, or they're going to say, I'm not really sure yet. Oh, and then I can address that, right? But now there's total transparency. Did I get that commitment or not? I know. And if I didn't, right, now I can address that. But that I can really be aligned with my buyer instead of hoping at the close when I send them a proposal, hoping everything's, they didn't have any questions, so I assume it's okay. Well, that assumption is pretty dangerous. But often how you frame things as well. And even to the point that was mentioned earlier, if you want to address, let's say you lose the sale and you want to use these 6 whys for to identify why, but you feel like they're giving you that politically correct answer. How do you get the answer to that? One tip I would say, you can use this throughout any part of the sale. When you're asking, for example, another application will be a great follow-up question, but you feel like, what, I'm kind of diving in here a little bit. I need to ask this question to truly understand their needs so I can serve them, but I don't want to push. So how do I frame the question? And oftentimes salespeople will just say, well, I can't ask that question. It just feels awkward. The question might be good. It's your presentation. That's probably a little awkward. So let's work on that. One tip that's based on, there's over 100 years of scientific research on this principle. It's called social proof. Now, social proof connects the persuasiveness of an idea with how others are responding to it. I mean, this principle is so popular. You mentioned Robert Cialdini's book, Influence. He talks about this. I mean, there's so much research on social proof, but salespeople often don't know how to apply it. So all you're doing is, in the situation with a question, you're making it normal. You're using social proof in your favor by sharing, a lot of people are concerned. Let's say that I have a reason why I think that they decided not to move forward with me. And so but I know if I just ask them, can I ask why, just for my feedback, why you chose not to move forward with us? They're going to give me some politically correct nonsense answer. And I know, okay, so I got to make it normal. But let's say I have an inclination, it might be because, they didn't feel like now was the right time. So let's say I want to go fishing for that. And so I might use social proof to normalize that so it's safe to give me the response. So oftentimes I found, Mark and David, when organizations don't move forward, that are in a similar situation, often they feel that now may not isn't the right time. I mean, do you guys find that that's the case here as well? Now I've made it safe, and they're going to go, now they don't have to feel like they're going to offend me, right? Or there's going to be any kind of confrontation because I just changed everything. And all I did was leverage social proof. And you can do that anytime you want to delve into, let's say I'm doing the discovery earlier in the sale, and I want this individual or this group to admit they have this problem and talk about it a little bit. And I know they have the problem. They've talked about it, but I'm just feeling a little friction as we go into it. And so I can use social proof. What could that sound like off the top of my head? Oftentimes when I talk to organizations just like yours, and they mentioned A, B, C, and D as you did, oftentimes they find that they're also dealing with E. Now, have you guys noticed anything with that as well? Oh, now it's safe. They don't have to feel like, oh, I'm, confessing our sins to this guy. Now it's like, oh, everyone like
Everybody
us.
does this.
Everybody does it, right? And now it's safe. And you'll find using social proof as you introduce questions will change the perception of the question. In other words, you can be bold in your questioning if you introduce it with social proof. If you take the social proof away, it's too brazen often. But if you introduce it with social proof, it changes the perception. And that's what we're dealing with a lot in sales, is the perception of the question changes how I respond to it. So if you feel like I need to ask this question, it's the right thing to do for them to really serve them, but I'm sensing friction, don't throw the question away. I would challenge us all to introduce it with social proof, and you will be astounded at how people favorably respond because you make it safe and normal for them to admit things that they might not otherwise admit.
We always talk about, David, the importance, both Davids, the importance of those questions in that sales call, in that discussion. And, people think that I can ad-lib this or I can improv this. And because I've been doing it for so long, I've got this down. I know the way to go do it. The way you frame that question changes everything.
Yes.
It makes all the difference in the world. And you're absolutely right. The way you frame both those questions, David, first of all, it empowers you to ask a direct question, with the right intent, right? So they don't feel like you're just dragging them through a sales process where you're trying to get yes, but you actually ask a sincere and authentic question. And then it also sets up the environment where they can share and say, yeah, we're feeling a little bit of that too. And it also, because it's just going to prompt you to say, prompting them to say, how did that client get through this?
Right.
Tell me that story, because I'm going to remember the story of that client. Excellent.
Yeah, it was almost so smooth, Mark. I almost answered the questions.
Yeah, you almost jumped in. Yeah, the role play was so good, and you almost answered the question.
Yeah, let me address that briefly, because I'm not reading off a script, and anyone can do what I did, because I'll frame it this way: I'm cheating. Here's how I'm cheating. I'm not saying come up with a good question about their problem. I don't know. But if you say, how do I introduce this question with social proof? The specificity of that allows anyone to do that. It becomes incredibly easy. The problem often with questions is they're so nebulous, right? It's like, okay, ask a question about their problem. I can do it millions of different ways there. Most of them could be good, some could be bad, some could be horrible. But when you say, okay, introduce that question, that was a great question. How would you introduce that with social proof? Oh, the directness of that allows me then to innovate in the moment with very little practice. Once I understand the principle, and I practice it a little bit, of course, but half an hour of practice on doing what I just did, anyone can do it as well, because you're using the science, right? You have the cheat code to the game a little bit, and you're like, okay, social proof lowers the perception of risk. It boosts people's receptiveness to an idea. So how do I inject that at the beginning of the question to change the perception of the question? And it's so empowering, to the point earlier. And that's, again, another application of how we can use over 100 years of science in really practical ways. And oftentimes asking some of the questions I just shared can be the difference between a sale or a no sale, because it's going to change the whole conversation and trajectory of that sales call. So I get passionate about this because this stuff works. Like in the real world today, this works right now, and your clients love it.
Well, I think your clients love it, David, because the real cheat code that you've shared was the first 5 minutes of this conversation where you said it's all about them.
Right.
This is the one thing we just keep screaming from the mountaintops on this podcast is it's not about me and my sales process and how good I am about doing a demo and showing technology. Nobody cares.
Yes.
They only care about them. And we have to authentically care about them. And they can sense that intent.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the things, the brain's always, you'll tell me more, you certainly know more, but I think our brain's always trying to figure out what's the intent of the other person that I'm talking to. How do I build trust and credibility? By making sure they understand my goal is actually exactly what you said. Help them make a better decision. Maybe it's us, maybe it's not. But if they believe I'm really trying to help them get to that better place one way or the other, then we're going to have a much better discussion.
Well said. I mean, I'm applauding as you're sharing that, because I go on the rants of no one cares about your product or service or company either. They care about themselves, and I think that's why I'm so passionate about this science. Is using some of this, it forces you to focus on your buyers, those you're selling to, because the models, you have to apply it to them. And I think oftentimes in selling, we are narcissistic. Most sales processes, if you say, why do you sell the way you do? People say, well, this is how I want to be sold to, or the guy next to me, he's killing it this month, and this is how he sells. So I'm just kind of copying him. But it's all based on the seller. Or this is what I think is important for you. So I'm going to talk about those things, and hopefully, you agree. We'll see. And it's that attitude where it's so seller centric. And so the science says, okay, you're the guide. Yes, as a salesperson, you matter, but it's all about those you're selling to. Where are they at in their decision process? And oftentimes when we get down to it, most of us, we sell to versions of ourselves. It's very narcissistic. So we're like, if I were in your situation, here was what I care about. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And then that's the sales call. And we want to be like, no, where is my buyer at? What's their priorities, their perspective? Most likely it's different than yours. And you might want to shape some things to make sure they have an accurate understanding and provide insights. But I also want to understand where they're at and be hyper focused on them and really align selling with how people buy. And that's why I'm so passionate about the science, is that it forces us to do this. And I think our natural tendency for most of us is to focus on ourselves, just like our buyer's tendency is, hey, what's in it for me? We kind of think, well, let me show you what would matter if I were in your position. And that perspective is so flawed, and it's so foundational to why I think often many of the problems we have in selling is because we all agree we want to be buyer centric, but in practice, most of us are seller centric, and it comes to, why do we sell the way we do? If the answer has anything to do with you or your company or the guy next to you, that is an indication it's seller centric. And that is 98% of people. When you ask them, why do you sell the way you do? Usually it comes back to them, or this is what my sales manager said to do. Okay. This is what he likes. Okay. Or she likes. So yeah, it's the science forces us to focus on the buyers because they're the ones who are making the decision.
Well, that history of how we've all got here, it has been experiential. You're right. Even with the company we run, and we're training thousands of salespeople, a lot of that is driven, frankly, from my experience, and then some of my research with great people like you. But where we take those nuggets and try and apply them, but it's experiential. So I think where you get to this point of applying some scientific principles to these things, what I think is so powerful, that is, people listening to this podcast took 2 or 3 of these and just applied them, try and apply them for the next 3 weeks, and then see what happens. Compare it against what you're doing today. Spend the half an hour, 45 minutes reframing, rewriting 4 or 5 questions, and see what happens in that discussion. Reframe the question for that courageous conversation tomorrow, the next day. See if you do get a better outcome. How do you feel given the question?
I got a quick question, Mark, if you don't mind.
Please.
Is there a scientific way to almost prep your brain to be almost like a learner or a student or a curious person? Sales calls because I think that so many salespeople, I got to make the numbers, I got to beat the competition, it almost pre-wires you to be that 98%. What sort of advice would you have for people out there like that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And there's a lot of research on this as well. One of the mindsets that we talk about a lot, because it really matters in any skill-based profession, but especially selling. There's a lot of science on this, specifically judging salespeople, and that is having what they call a growth mindset. A growth mindset is simply viewing your sales ability like a muscle that needs to be continually developed. And so there's a lot of practical ways you can foster a growth mindset. The reason that I advocate for this is there's a number of scientific, like real scientific studies, not survey data, not sales data, but real science that shows salespeople with a growth mindset versus those who don't have one. They outsell at about a 2-to-1 ratio. So that's 100% increase. Same company, same product, same service. Huge difference. The reason why is they're always improving. They're always learning. They're getting better and better and better. And eventually they win because it's cumulative over a year or a couple of years, even a month. You can grow so quickly and improve. So how do we do that? I think one thing to answer your question real directly is to think about how you view success. What the research shows is great salespeople not only have objective performance goals, I want to hit this number, this closing rate, let's say, but also they have learning goals. And so another way to think about it is if you were to end this year and you were to hit all your performance objectives, okay, you hit the volume you want, you make bonus, whatever, President's Club, whatever it is, but you don't improve really in your sales ability. You don't grow at all. Did you have a successful year? And I would suggest the answer be no, because in today's hyper competitive marketplace, if you don't move forward, eventually you fall behind. So, yeah, it's great you hit your performance goals. That's what we want to do in selling. That's how often we're judged. But if I'm not growing, I know that success is short-lived. And so I want to have growth goals as well. So how am I growing? And so you're always asking that question of what did I learn today? What can I improve on? How do I act on what I learned? That's the power of those win-loss analysis, right? It's a way to integrate in practice that idea of a growth mindset, because those who have a growth mindset dominate over time, and long-term successes in selling is really reflective on a growth mindset. It's very difficult, almost impossible for someone to become successful and remain successful in this kind of competitive environment we're in as sellers without a growth mindset. Because if you don't have one, meaning you don't care about growing, and someone who's maybe not as gifted or as talented as you is obsessed with it, over time, they just keep getting better and better. And you're not. And over time, they dominate. So integrating your growth mindset and trying to strengthen it by making learning its own reward, that's part of what success looks like. And when you start thinking like that, success comes more rapidly. Selling gets a lot more enjoyable. People feel more fulfilled in their work because they're growing. Oftentimes when people are like, I don't like this job anymore, that anymore is because they've stopped growing. They feel like, well, there's nothing for me to do. They're not trying to grow. When you grow, you feel like you're alive and you're learning, especially in selling, where the stuff we're talking about today, I mean, we could apply it outside of the professional world into our everyday life. Who doesn't want to be more influential? Well, that's kind of what selling is. And so there's so much applications, but when you're learning, you're growing and you're improving, and you're going to have more fulfillment in your work and in your life. So a growth mindset, mission critical.
And so, David, what's the next thing you need to learn as a sales coach and consultant and trainer and author? What's the next thing you need to learn?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the big initiatives that we have that I've just gotten done relatively recently, it takes years for us to do some of these models, like the 6 whys I shared. That seemed very innocent. That was 6.5 years using the science and reading it and applying it and making sure we had all the dots, covered. One thing we just got done with was reframing, looking at a reframing model that you can apply in any part of the sale and having numerous reframes. Social proof was just one of them that I shared. Another big initiative that we just finished up recently too is sales coaching. That's one thing I've been trying to grow. And how do I get people better faster? Speed matters a lot in coaching. No one wants to be coached for years and years and have little improvement. You got to get improvement rapidly. So how do we do that? I think that's one thing. The one thing I'm working on right now, though, is mental toughness. Boosting resiliency. There's some really interesting science on that I'm kind of still in the deep end of the pool with. Creating models that are really actionable and easy to understand. But we've written a lot about grit and persistence, but resiliency and mental toughness. So how do you deal with, a bad sales call, or, you get a bad letter in the mail, or something personally happens? How do you bounce back from that? Some people are good at that, others aren't, but there's some science on specific things all of us can do. So that's kind of what I'm working on right now and beginning to create some models for is mental toughness, which I think is really relevant, not just for sales, but for life.
Well, by the way, I for everybody listening, and we're going to share these in the show notes and you'll speak to them in a second, but I thought there was some fantastic tools on your website. I'm a real fan of well put together white papers, coaching white papers, blogs, and yours are all very well put together where, it's the old Mark Twain adage, I wrote you a long letter. If I'd taken more time, I would have written you a short letter. And yours are the short letter. The hard work's been put into it where in a 3-minute read, somebody can really extract some fantastic information. So I'd love to hear about these new ones coming down, and I'm sure they're going to lead to a new book. But I think that resilience is very important, and the growth mindset. We spend a lot of time on this podcast talking about mindset and how in the old days it used to be skill set plus tool set plus mindset equals results. And now it's skill set plus tool set times mindset equals results, because it's so important. How do you process everything that takes place? We've all had those situations where maybe we drop the ball. I'm certainly the worst offender. And even now, I still spend too much time beating myself up over it instead of just package it in, grab it, learn, move on. Because the time I'm wasting beating myself up could be time I could be spending in the right mindset, making something else good happen.
Yeah.
I have one more question, Mark, before we go. I'm sorry.
We're not going anywhere, sure.
But I read a lot of your blogs this morning, David. And like Mark said, they're extremely easy to read. They're one page. And so the one thing I really wanted to ask today was all this about traits. You talk a little bit about traits, you talk about intrinsic motivation, you talk about growth mindset, you talk about grit. What if you don't have those traits naturally? What does the science say about, are you capable of having those traits?
Yeah, that's a great question. So with the intrinsic motivation, grit, growth mindset, and the other was too, like even optimism is an important trait we talk about a lot. And there's others. The empowering thing from the science is that we can all improve in this area in every one. In fact, in my newest book, we have kind of a way to assess your grit and your growth mindset. And then we have specific things, regardless of where you fall in that assessment. You have a lot, you have a little, you're kind of in between. It doesn't matter. All of us want to get better. We want to grow in this area because it just enriches our life and our career. And so what can we do? And that's the really empowering thing, that when I read the science and wade through all this, it's like, okay, this matters, but can we do anything about it? And the empowering message is absolutely. All of us can grow in our intrinsic motivation, in our grit, in our growth mindset, in our optimism. And so being awareness is the first step, but then there's specific things all of us can do to grow there. And that's what I find really empowering, is that it's not like, okay, if you have a growth mindset, you're going to be more successful. And if too bad if you don't, there's not much you can do. That's not the message of the science, because that would just be depressing. This is something that any of us can skill up in. And there's a lot of science that guides us to that. In fact, my newest book, Sell More with Science, we do that. We talk specifically about grit and a growth mindset. And really the focus is, what can you do to grow in this area? Because when you do, it predicts sales success in so many ways and in so many studies. So it's definitely worth the effort. But yeah, that's the exciting news, is you can change. And that's what the science tells us. Regardless of where you are right now, you can change. And oftentimes I found, myself included, I always remind myself of this, often we overestimate the change we can make in a day, but we vastly underestimate what you can do in 6 months or a year. In 5 years, any of us could radically change our life so much that you're almost unrecognizable to your current self. If you focused on something daily and devoted a large amount of time and effort and training to anything, in 5 years from now, you could be amazing at that thing. We often don't think about that. We think about it in very short term. So it's empowering, but with growth and growth mindset, grit, and optimism, intrinsic motivation, oftentimes you can improve very, very quickly. Once you become aware of it, oftentimes in a matter of days, you can have a noticeable improvement.
See, Mark,
I'm sorry, David, go ahead.
I said, see, Mark, there's hope for me yet.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
For all of us, yes.
I think we all enjoy the journey too.
Yeah.
And certainly I think the people listening to a podcast like this, they have a natural growth mindset, and they already know that sometimes it's scary jumping outside that comfort zone, but then it becomes a lot of fun. And then the comfort zone's bigger and you want to do it again. You want to do it again and do it again. Yeah. Beautifully well said, David. And you did say hey, this would take hours to do. I'm sure there's lots of people who want to spend hours with your content and your newest book and everything your business does. Tell us first of all, I just want to say, hey, thank you for joining today. I can't believe we're out of time. It just went like that. How do the folks listening today learn more about you? And they should absolutely be buying both your books, but certainly the latest book, Sell More with Science.
Yeah, thank you so much. So you can go to our website, Hoffeld, Hoffeld group.com. There's a lot of resources on there, as mentioned, white papers, podcasts, articles, blogs that you can look at at no cost and get your feet even more wet with the science-based selling. And then, of course, my two books, The Science of Selling and Sell More with Science, are available anywhere fine books are sold.
Fantastic. Well, David Hoffeld, thank you so much for joining today. David Fauser, thank you for being my partner in crime with these as usual. And folks, thank you so much for listening. We exist because we want to help improve the performance and professionalism of B2B sales. And we believe that podcasts like this can help change your behaviors or your mindset, skill set, and tool set immediately. And today's podcast is a great example of that. We also know we can get better. So please let us know how we can do that. You can email me directly personally, Mark Cox at inthefunnel.com. I check that email, and we love constructive criticism. That's how we've made the changes up to now in the show. So let us know what we can do to make this hour more effective for you. And thank you all for listening. And if you did enjoy today's podcast, please like and subscribe to the Selling Well podcast. And thank you for that. Davids, thank you. Until next time.
Thanks so much.
Wow, hard to believe the hour went that quickly, eh, David?
I can't believe it because he's such an engaging guy. And you know, this whole thing with, I love the word science just in general, because science just seems to take out the emotion. And, you know, he talked a lot about this safe space to create. And I think once you use the word science and evidence and stuff like that, then it can almost get someone's guard down. Have you found that yourself, Mark, and when you're working with people?
Yeah, you know what? I really should, I have found that facts matter. And, you know, sometimes when you're leading different sales organizations, when you come in with your opinion, it's one thing. But when you have third-party sources for facts and data, they take it, there's a different way of processing it. Somebody's can be a little bit more open-minded in terms of thinking about a different way of doing things or a way of elevating performance. So I've really tried to leverage it so it gets away from my opinion and moves towards some facts and data. And that's science. Facts and data to back it up. You know, the other thing I kind of get from a conversation today, David, when we come across these people who are so enthusiastic about B2B sales as us, that passion and optimism and enthusiasm just comes through. And, you know, for the folks listening, that hour for me felt like it was 12 minutes of talking.
I mean, I looked down at the time, it's like, oh my gosh, like we're almost at that hour, because I literally felt we were 10 minutes in, Mark. And he was just such a fascinating guy. And you know, I love the fact, I mean, I think that if you were to say to me, you know, before reading his book or interviewing him, I want you to go prove with science sales. What an undertaking for him to
No
take.
kidding.
You know, like it's just because there's so many dynamics. We're dealing with humans here, and these dynamics that are happening within the sales process. I never would have really thought to, you know, use a scientific methodology to have proven success, but it seems like it's something that we should really pay attention to.
Oh, no kidding. I love these people, by the way, who process this kind of information and then break it down into digestible chunks like the 6 whys. So you correct me, but I think it referenced in his materials that he went through 1,000 different academic reference materials, whether it's a journal or a white paper or a blog or something, 1,000 to come up with the content for the book. And that's where I remember when I was reading Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, and it talked about 135 different cognitive biases. I just got so lost. I didn't know how to extract. It was such a hard read. I couldn't extract the stuff I needed to figure out how to behave differently tomorrow. I absolutely think David's books do that. They break it down into manageable chunks that we can actually apply in his resources online. Great guest, great conversation. And stuff that we can take away and we can apply right now.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. Yeah, actually, it comes back to me. His first book is when I first took over my sales management job from a different job, and that was actually the first book that I read.
Wow.
Job.
Wow.
I know, it's just, and so it's that I even have I developed a one pager at the time of the 6 whys, and I think to get something so simple, like your Mark Twain comment that you alluded to, takes so much time, and I think I'm really happy that he put the time in, because it's pretty valuable. I would say it's pretty valuable to anybody in sales or anybody managing a sales team, because it truly is something. And it's hard to get your head around it, I think, just from this quick interview. And I think the only way you're going to really get the full experience is by actually picking up the book and reading. I think it's chapter 4 and really understanding his concept, because it really is quite brilliant, to be honest with you.
Well said. Hey, sir, we'll stay on this journey. Let's keep learning.
Absolutely, sir.
See you next time.
You got it.